Hey everyone, we're back. We're painting the Vampire Hunters, and wow, the good news is they're finished. And yeah, here they are. I'm super happy with how they've turned out. It's been quite a horrible journey, to be honest, and I think I'll do a separate video where I just talk about kind of the experience of Golden Demon. So, keep the tutorials and my thoughts separate, basically. But they were really hard. I pushed to get them done, and yeah, there's just so many details. As you can see, it felt relentless, but I am really happy with them. So it was really tough at times, and tough to find the time as well. Just I squeezed in every hour I could to do every little detail. And yeah, I feel like it was totally worth it now, but it was a fight. In today's video, we're going to do the cloaks, or the big area of cloth. And I thought that'd be cool because you've got this purple on the back, which is a very smooth piece of cloth. And on the inside, we've got some textured cloth. So I thought it'd be cool to go over highly textured stuff in the bone color, and then smooth cloth with the purple. And then I'm going to obviously use all the material and the footage I've got to give you a couple more tutorials, but there's so many details, I wasn't sure how to break up these videos, so I thought I'd start off with the cloth. It's going to be in like the reverse, or not reverse, but a different order into which I actually painted them. But the truth is, I just hopped around all the different materials. I kind of didn't do it in a logical order because I started some of the silver and I got fed up with it. And then I did some leather and got bored of that, so I hopped around. So I'm going to do the tutorials in a way that's a bit nicer for you to watch. So yeah, but in this first one, we're going to do this awesome purple cloth. You know me, it's purple, but at least there's artwork for me to, justify the fact that I've painted these purple. And yeah, we'll go from there. So let's look at the paints I used first of all. The main paint for the purple is going to be Screamer Pink, and I'm going to shade that with Baraknar Burgundy. I tried black, and Baraknar was more than dark enough. And I tried this highlight of Sickly Pink, but to be honest, any lighter colour will do, even white, because we don't need that much contrast with this colour. I also used Orange Brown when we painted any of the parts near the flame with this. For the inside, which is like a bony colour, I used a warm grey from AK, and I used Deck Tan for the highlight. And weirdly, it doesn't look like they're any different, but I found there was almost more than enough contrast. So I think the way they dry is just totally different. I did add a little bit of white to the Deck Tan for the highlights, and some burnt umber to shade. But yeah, they were great, those two colours. Like I said, I did the purple cloth on the back actually really late on. I'd almost finished the model, but I thought it'd be good to do this tutorial today. But I did block in loads of the parts. All of the leather was either Rhinox hide or burnt umber. But I think, yeah, I basically gave a thin coat of burnt umber to all the leather parts before I worked on the cloth. You can see I had a trial run and actually painted a bit of the purple on the front. But our demonstration today will be on the back here because it's such a nice piece of cloth to work on. It's a great sculpt, it's big, so it's good to film and good to do the tutorial on. The base coat is going to be warm grey mixed with a tiny bit of burnt umber. I did the female character, I must know their names, with loads of burnt umber, and it worked out fine in the end, but like I said, there's actually quite a lot of contrast between the Deck Tan and the warm grey, so you just need it a little bit darker, and actually only in the kind of parts that are really in shadow. This part here, you can base coat in warm grey because, yeah, you've got enough contrast there. You can see I actually took it off the corks so I could get access to the inside here. So this is the part that needs to be a little bit darker because it's on the inside here. But yeah, I'm holding the gun and I haven't painted that yet, so it's okay. But I did actually blue tack these down while I painted the inside. On her, I base coated it a little bit too dark, and it took me ages, actually. So here I'm kind of layering up warm grey with a little bit of the burnt umber, which was, a mistake I learnt, and so I base coated his a little paler. But the inside where it's really dark worked, because that's really recessed here. So you have to mix it on the palette and use your judgment, but burnt umber is so lovely. I'm using this a lot on this project as a general shadow color. I also blocked in a few parts in black, like the boots, and when we do another video, we'll go over the black boots. But yeah, I either base coated things in burnt umber or black, but I do think it's good to base coat stuff at this point. It's definitely my new kind of way of working these days. So here I'm applying the warm grey to that base coat of warm grey mixed with burnt umber, and the inside part obviously faces down, so it needs to be a little bit darker. I actually did it too dark and I needed to lighten it up later on in the process. So like I said, if you base coat with just a touch of burnt umber, then it'll be fantastic. We're going to paint a lot of texture on this, but the first thing to do, I think, is just get some general highlights on here. So that's why I'm working in a big space. On the inside, you can see I start to use small lines and texture with that same warm grey. And that's because I want this to be darker, but I could use that sort of first big highlight colour here to add some texture to the shadows. It's kind of like the areas that are in light, you can use your base coat to texture the areas that are in shadow, if that makes sense. So all I do is repeat this process for the highlights, adding in deck tan, and I just use lots of random brush strokes to build up a soft texture as I go up in the highlights. If the texture is too obvious, then you can kind of glaze over it, but the difference between this warm grey and deck tan is quite subtle, so I think you can just do lots of little dots and lines with deck tan and build up your highlights gradually. If you want more contrast, you can obviously add more burnt umber for shading, or add a little bit of white into the deck tan. For this upper part, I added a little bit of pastel peach into deck tan to represent the light. So it didn't need to be massive because it was, further away than the arm, but just a little bit of peach and making sure I'm just highlighting, where the fire can see. So it's just that kind of top corner. But I wanted lots of subtle bits of OSL on this model. So just incorporating that light, but not a really bright orange block, And I use that same technique of building up texture with the lines. Here you can see the final effect on the inside. So it's quite subtle and there's not a massive contrast, but when you zoom in, you can see lots of little lines. I think it looks really interesting. I then added a few dots of burnt umber that you could say is like mud or dirt or chips or something, but this was just another level of texture. I did these really small and sparingly, just kind of in the lower part. And if I made a mistake, I could just go over it with a deck tan. And because of the nature of this textured part, it's very easy to correct mistakes and things like that. But yeah, just take your time with diluted paint and build up lots of random lines, and you get this very nice, subtle looking texture. Moving on to the purple cloth, we'll do quite a different technique, and here you can see I'm using Baraknar Burgundy, and wherever it's black from my pre-highlight, I'm going to block it in. Often I see people asking, what do I do with a pre-highlight? I just base coat over it and it doesn't do anything. But this is a really nice way of working out where the lights and shading is going to be in your cloth. So yeah, anywhere where it's really dark and the airbrush hasn't got to it, that part there maybe doesn't need it, but I tried it anyway. But you can block in with this color. So it's a really nice map to start things out. And that's one way you can use a pre-highlight. So you can see it's dried, it's quite rough, but it's a good start. And now we go in with the Screamer Pink, and I'm going to use it nice and diluted. And I'm going to work quite quickly, actually, just trying to base cut in all of these white areas. I'm not worried about going over the Baraknar Burgundy. It's quite a translucent paint. Basically the coverage is crap, which actually makes it really good for blending into this color. But yeah, I start out by blocking in loosely where the white is, and having white underneath really helps Screamer Pink to get a good foundation. It's a lovely color, but coverage isn't amazing. Even over white, it's going to take quite a few coats to get it super clean, but it's worth it in the end for the finish and the color. So you can see it here after a couple coats, and what I'm doing now is taking Screamer Pink again, but I'm actually going over the Baraknar Burgundy, and that's because I think these shadows are too severe. Obviously Baraknar Burgundy is darker anyway, and it went over a black primer, so it's kind of exaggerated how dark it is. But going over it with the Screamer Pink is going to start to blend it in quite nicely. So this is what it looks like after a couple more coats of Screamer Pink, and I think that is a fantastic start. So we've got less contrast now, but it's the right amount really for a piece of cloth. But we've got a very smooth result because we've used diluted paint, quite a few layers, and actually that pale base coat just helps so much. Now we're going to add some highlights, and I'm adding in that sickly pink, which I found was, really nice, good coverage. I've used white before and it's absolutely fine, but the sickly pink just makes it a little easier to control because obviously it's not as bright as white. It doesn't change the color of Screamer Pink as dramatically as pure white. So here I'm kind of planning my highlights, and because I've got a nice solid foundation of Screamer Pink, I know if I make any mistakes or overdo it on the highlights, I can go back to it, glaze it in, and just correct anything. So it's quite nice to have that solid foundation of Screamer Pink, and that's actually a big advantage of not airbrushing something like this, is I can go back and just correct anything pretty easily. So I'm starting with quite a broad highlight here, so you can see it's fairly thick, but it's only a slightly bit lighter. What I found with Screamer Pink is just a little bit of something like white or this colour changes how it works dramatically, because the coverage is so poor. You add a tiny bit of white, and even though the colour hasn't changed much, the coverage has. So my first highlight has a very small amount in it, and you'll see when you use it that it does change it quite dramatically. But yeah, I just go through and sort of plan where my highlights are going to be. After the first layer, I just build up slowly with a slightly brighter colour. So I just add a touch more sickly pink, and I don't want a dramatic contrast on this cloth. I want it to look cool, but yeah, it's a piece of cloth, so it shouldn't have really, really bright highlights. So yeah, I'm just going to gradually build up and see how it goes. Actually, at this point, it almost looked like the highlighting is enough. I took it much further than this, but then I glazed it all back. So you might find that after one or two highlights, it's quite subtle, but it looks enough. So you kind of have to adjust how much highlighting you want, depending on what material you want it to represent. So here I've added more sickly pink highlights in exactly the same way. And I'm adding very fine highlights now with even more sickly pink added to it. So this is way too much. It's far too bright, as you can see. But one of the techniques I use for cloth specifically is to highlight it too far and then glaze it back. And that is because I can get very vivid results like this and very nice colors, because when we glaze over this pale color, it blends it all together amazingly and we get a really strong saturated color. So you might find it easier just to build up the highlights like in the previous step and call it done, but I quite like using this because I can really see where I'm going with the bright colors, and glazing over the top I just get a really nice result. So I've got a piece I did a while back that I'll be revealing soon, and I think it's got my best cloth on it, and this is the technique I used. Okay, so here we go. The crucial step is the glazing. So Screamer Pink, we had that lovely foundation, and I've diluted that down with a lot of water, and I've got very, very little on the brush. So I just did it on the paper there so you could see me removing the paint, but you just do not want to flood any paint anywhere. You need basically nothing on the brush, and because it's so diluted, it will leave the brush really easily anyway. And just anywhere where you've overdone the highlights, just put this little film of very see-through paint over the top. What you'll find is it will knock the color back, and it will also blend everything in, and hopefully you'll get a really nice vibrant looking highlight, but it won't be over the top. The amount of glazes you need to do depends on how much you over highlighted it and how good of a job you did. So you need to really practice this technique and understand how it works. But I think the most important thing is don't have hardly anything on your brush. You don't want any puddles or anything like that. and that's how you get the marks, basically the tide marks. If you're just putting a tiny bit down at a time and gradually blurring those lines, then you'll get the right result. But hopefully when you see it finished, you can see it's worth it. But just going over with this really heavily diluted Screamer Pink, it just makes it a wonderful finish, a wonderful color. So you can see here I'm working and doing a much broader area now because I'm just trying to get the finish the same. I apply a very thin layer, make sure it's bone dry, and then I make a judgment if I need to repeat the steps. And in time, you'll get used to glazing and you'll understand how much you need to do. So here they are. These are the finished miniatures, obviously, but let's turn them around and we can have a look at the cloaks after the glazing. So you can see I got the results pretty similar on both of them, and in the hand, I think it's a pretty smooth result. It's not perfect, to be honest. I could have done it better, but I am really happy. I think that's definitely good enough for the show, and I've done the same for that on both sides. So yeah, I'm really happy with that. I hope you enjoyed those two kind of techniques. So one, we built up the highlights with lots of lines for texture, and the other, we did a normal layering technique, but I think the key thing was showing you all that glazing really. So I hope you can see different ways to do this cloth. I'm trying to do these videos a little more bite-sized, so to me this feels like quite a short video, but I hope it's easier for you to digest. And after finishing these, there are so many different recipes and different things. I think I've done 5 types of leather, and I just didn't want that all hidden in one video. So I thought I'll separate out some bite-sized chunks, and hopefully you enjoy that more and you can kind of go back to the ones you want. I think for the leather, I might do like a quick fire recipe video where it's just recipe 1, this brown, this one, and this one, and it goes on like that, because the technique is going to be the same. It's basically like the inside of the cloth where I do the scratches and the texture and stuff like that. So I think I'll go over one in detail, and then I'll just give you loads of really cool recipes, and I'll explain why I've mixed it up like that. Anyway, I'll save that for the next video. But yeah, plenty of content still to come. I think I'm going to talk about the non-metallic metal silver with the cold side and the warm side of that again. I'm going to tell you about non-metallic gold that I painted and completely erased. And yeah, we'll go over those leather textures and stuff like that. But yeah, plenty of content to come. I hope you're enjoying all these different recipes and techniques that are coming from just these 2 models. I've certainly found it really interesting how many techniques I've managed to use on these, and hopefully that's interesting for you guys. Okay, until then, have fun painting and leave your comments. See you soon.